A pleasure to meet y'all at last, and welcome back to Nerf Secrets Revealed. Now, I would just like to say very much, thank you so much for trying to watch the series as much as possible, and thank you so much for trying to give this series some more intuition as to what content I should try to bring out to the series at any given point in time. But here's a little message. I am going to be bringing back countdowns to the series, because after all, I have not been doing countdowns for months now, and I feel like that now would be a great time for me to get back on into it. So, there have been a few countdowns I was able to make, and so here we go. For this countdown for today's episode, here on April 25th, we got ourselves top 16 worst electrical shortages in motorized blasters. Number 16, the Rapid Strike. Being that it's not as recent as many other motorized blasters, the Rapid Strike was a pretty big hit for the 2013 model production year in the N-Strike Elite lineup. The Rapid Strike, however, did have itself a front-loaded compartment that would require 4 C batteries to be put within its compartment for it to motorize shoot up to 18 darts with rapid fire action, or even single fire action, whichever you choose. However though, this actually did end up causing a bit of a problem for the Rapid Strike's function over time, especially within a 6 to 7 year period, as I myself have had some experience with the Rapid Strike's shortages in its electrical components, especially with a few of the circuits that would draw power from the batteries into the flywheel system, and this would evidently leak out some of the performance ratio and cause darts to fly even less further than they would when the Rapid Strike would have been out of its own packaging for the very first time. Number 15, the Glow Shot. The Glow Shot is a way better example as to show how glow-in-the-dark type blasters would work well in the nighttime. Being that it had itself a transparent shell, and it had itself a lot of green-colored glow-in-the-dark LED lighting on the inside, the Glow Shot was a pretty big deal for most of us who are big fans of glow-in-the-dark anything. But glow-in-the-dark only works so much in terms of a blaster like this. With the Glow Shot, in my case especially, there have actually been a few notable pieces of information that led to me to believe that the Glow Shot itself was suffering from a bit of trouble itself from the start, simply because even though it only took a couple AAA batteries just for its LEDs to power up in the interior of its shell, the Glow Shot itself had itself a few problems over time, especially if you kept the lighting on for too long within its shell, as this would actually cause a few problems to occur, especially with the concentration of lower lighting over time. So this way, the glow-in-the-dark technology with the LED lighting on the interior would no longer work if you kept the lighting on long enough. So that's why you'd have yourself the ability to use some precautions as much as possible to ensure that your glow-in-the-dark technology lasts as long as possible. Number 14, the Raven CS18. Being that it was the first ever rendition of a whole lineup of Raven-style Nerf blasters that ran since 2012, the original Raven CS18 itself from the N-Strike lineup, even though it was released at the same time as its elite counterpart, which I've known as the Reaper, as the Regurgitator CS18. The Reaper is someone else that I named another blaster. The Regurgitator CS18, though, didn't really have as much problems as its older counterpart from the N-Strike lineup. The Raven CS18 itself used some AAA batteries, just like the Glow Shot did, to power up its glow-in-the-dark technology. Except this one's actually a bit worse of a case. In terms of the Raven's functionality, within its glow-in-the-dark technology especially, even though it used AAA batteries to power its glow-in-the-dark clip, it used another 4 batteries, although those were AA's, to power the blaster's flywheels. With the use of 8 batteries at once, money sometimes is not always going to be something that you're going to want to hope for, because it might seem like a waste of money. Simply put, because of the AAA batteries interfering with the functions of AA batteries, being that both of those types of batteries have similarly low amounts of power built into them, it's safe to say that with 2 different types of power being mixed in together, it's a surefire way to get yourself a surplus of problems along the way. And so, that's just what led me to figure out that the Raven CS18 may be slightly worse than the Glow Shot or even the Rapid Strike. And so, that's just what makes the Raven, or even its other counterparts, including the Regurgitator, or even the Elite XT yellow-colored Raven Fire, which I also gave it a new name on another part in this list. Number 13, the Barricade. Now, number 13 is going to be the Barricade, simply because of how the Barricade has had itself a reputation for being the louder, noisier counterpart of the Elite Stockade. Now, the Barricade, of course, is the older counterpart of the Stockade simply because of its N-Strike affiliation, but along with the fact that it used AA batteries to power its very noisy flywheels in contrast to its younger counterpart from the Elite lineup, which also included its own stock for start storage, the Barricade itself has actually had itself somewhat worthy problems that would make it a pretty poor blaster that would give it some poor ratings by anybody of any type of criticism whatsoever. The Barricade used 4 AA batteries in similarity to the Raven CS18 to power its flywheels, but yet, the Barricade somehow gets a bit worse, not only because of its relation with louder flywheels in contrast to some newer counterparts from more recent times. The Barricade Rev 10 does have a few more problems based on electrical components and connection. The type of electrical components that would help to power the flywheels wouldn't always go down so quickly, and they would not always help to work as well. This will cause some wear and tear over time to occur with the wiring, along with the electrical circuits that would help to power juice up to the flywheels. Heating is also another big problem that plays into this type of role, as sometimes the Barricade has had itself a fair share of a reputation of heating up, even when not in direct sunlight, and in a much cooler environment. In my case, however, it wasn't all too bad though, but Barricade still does get itself a higher part on this list simply because of how its reputation of having noisy flywheels, heating up in the interior, and the fact that sometimes poor connections could cause some problems over time with its function. Number 12, the Hailfire. Being that it was one of the biggest flagship blasters of the year 2012, the Hailfire itself was a big staple amongst the N-Strike Elite lineup, being that it was a newer design and a newer blaster for the year itself. The Hailfire may have had itself some pretty big advantages with the use to put in multiple clips onto its turntable, which is put in underneath, and the fact that it does use a second trigger to power the flywheels and a first trigger to fire the darts. But let's just say that it's not always going to be what you expect, because the Hailfire itself actually has had itself a few other problems with it. Alongside the fact that sometimes the clips would not go in properly, and the Hailfire's exterior shell that would help to protect the clips from getting damaged whenever the blaster itself got dropped or something wouldn't always go in, like the puzzle itself should have became. The electrical components that would surround the flywheels and the wiring that would connect from the electrical circuits that would provide juice from the batteries to the flywheels, they also wouldn't have themselves some pretty good connections, except the connections are slightly worse, simply because most of the time when you accidentally hit the second trigger with your middle finger, or your index finger, whichever one you use to power on the flywheels, which would end up killing the batteries, the Hailfire itself is just deemed to be slightly more worse than some other louder, more sophisticated designs out there, especially ones from older times. Some ones from newer times have also gotten themselves some problems, but mostly we cut them some slack for some many other aspects that had made them a much higher advantage in contrast to some of their own problems. Number 11, the Rhino Fire. The Rhino Fire was yet another big staple and another big flagship blaster for the big old Elite lineup. Except this was the Elite XD lineup, which the Elite XD was a smaller, yet more subtle sub-lineup to the Elite lineup. The Elite lineup had been around since 2012, but the Elite XD lineup, starting around 2013, or even 2014 for that matter, had itself some pretty good blasters that could shoot well up to 90 feet. The Elite XD lineup had blasters including the Demolisher, the Rhino Fire, the Sharp Fire, the Double Down, and some others out there. Ever since 2013 or 2014, there have actually been quite a good number of blasters out there that we have come to know about. But the Rhino Fire is just one of those that would make you scream, because it does take D batteries, similar to the Vulcan EBF-25 and Stampede ECS-10, which would make it much more heavier and a bit more impossible to carry. But electrical system shortages are also not off the hook in this case. My experiences with the Rhino Fire being that sometimes the electrical systems would cause wear and tear in the functions itself, not only for the flywheels that were used for the blaster, but sometimes for some other aspects of the blaster itself, especially when it came to loading a clip inside properly. Number 10, the Stockade. Being that it is actually the younger part of the Barricade, you would hope that Nerf and Hasbro would ultimately iron out any of the flaws that were indicated on the Barricade's design and function. But no, the Stockade somehow seems to have done a bit worse here. The Stockade may have come with its own stock that would be used for dart storage, and it may have had some much more quieter sounding flywheels and flywheels that were much more tighter, which would prevent any noise from coming through. But the Stockade itself, in case of my kinds of experiences with the Stockade, they aren't always as fond as they should become. Because with the Stockade's electrical problems itself, they actually would end up causing the flywheels to not accept certain darts, especially with Whistler darts, with Streamlines, with many other types of darts we have out there. Of course, suction tip darts were not acceptable for the Barricade, but in the Stockade, they're somewhat worse when it comes to flying out of the flywheels of the Stockade itself. So this in turn would actually make this type of blaster somewhat worse than the Barricade. The Barricade may have been noisy, but it sure as heck have had itself a few more advantages aside from all of its other flaws that I had mentioned earlier in this video. Number 9, the Vulcan EBF-25. The Vulcan EBF-25 had itself a pretty good reputation out there for being one of the largest Nerf blasters out there, and undoubtedly one of the most expensive in its time. But with other blasters out there like the Stampede, the Raven, the Barricade, sandwiching the Vulcan in terms of competition based on who would be able to afford it and who would be able to try it out for the first time, it was practically debatable at this point, simply because of the Vulcan EBF-25's main old function, which is to just use a belt chain to dispense darts out, and then just use a simple turntable style catcher, which would be used to grab each shell, which would hold the dart inside, and then with the use of an air plunger that would bob against the back of each shell, which would launch the dart at least 25 feet in range. The Vulcan EBF-25 had a bit more of a complex design and capability than we ever thought. Although, many of these pieces can actually be put into some slack right there. You can cut them some slack for right now because of how the Vulcan EBF-25 may have also taken D batteries to power its electrical systems. But once again, this is just one of those examples where a D cell battery powered Nerf blaster out there always seems to have flaws, not just with weight or handling or just the ability to have it set up somewhere delicate. The Vulcan EBF-25 was surely a bad example of its own time. Now that I've had the Vulcan EBF-25, I can just say right now that the electrical systems of the blaster itself are not as appreciative, and I feel like they shouldn't be as appreciative as many people would think of it today. Number 8, the Strife. The Strife was another popular clip-loaded, battery-powered blaster out there, but being that it was a motorized blaster that was very easy, lightweight, and just simply a bit more simplistic to use with the fact that it had itself tactical rail lines on the top and the sides, along with barrel attachment point, stock attachment point, and even a clip point that could allow you to choose whatever capacity of clip that you want. The Strife itself should have been enough to just make everybody happy in terms of who would like Nerf better than the other. But the Strife does, in fact, have itself a few more problems than usual. And it's simply because of how sometimes the Strife itself had a bit more dysfunction than what was truly necessary. Number 7 is the Power Belt of the Speed Swarm. They're both the same blaster, but they do come from different lineups. The Speed Swarm is the older counterpart of the Power Belt, although they actually both don't have as good of systems as they probably should, especially when it comes to the use of their own electrical systems. Electrical system shortages in this case, because I've actually owned the Speed Swarm as well. Many of these blasters that I've mentioned here with their electrical shortage problems were blasters that I originally owned. But in the case of the Speed Swarm, there has been quite some time to where that the electrical systems would eventually slow down its ability to turn its barrel on the front to where it would fire darts at a slower rate. In terms of how you could go with firing darts per second, the Power Belt for the Speed Swarm would originally fire up to 2 darts a second, but because I've owned the Speed Swarm for a few years now, I almost feel like that it would be more than just safe to say that the Speed Swarm itself is just that bad. You use it long enough and the darts per second rate would eventually go down far enough to at least 1 dart per second, or even less depending on how old the blaster is in your collection. Number 6, the Nitron. Being that it was one of the only motorized disc blasters at the time, the Vortex Nitron already had itself a few big problems that many of us already knew about, especially when it came to terms with the use of accidentally hitting the second trigger with your finger, which would end up killing the batteries over time, along with the point that, well, the scope on the top with its ability to zoom in with the green lighting on the inside powered by a few AAA batteries, it just wasn't as useful as we thought it would. But one of the biggest problems is that even though the Nitron is actually equipped with a switch that would prevent you from killing the batteries by accidentally bumping your middle finger into the second trigger, this only caused a certain number of flaws in my case. My case being that for as long as I've had the Vortex Nitron, it's just simple to explain how the Nitron itself does have its own flaws, being that even though it's equipped with that kind of switch to where we can prevent it from killing its own batteries over time, the Nitron does actually use up these batteries no matter how well you use the switch or how often you use that switch. Number 5, the Rivals Hera MXVII 1200. The Hera MXVII 1200 was one of the most recent releases in the Rivals lineup, but the Hera itself does have some problems. Even though I haven't owned this blaster, I have looked into how the Hera's function happens to work. It does work in some ways compared to many other blasters that we've had out there with 2 triggers and a very decent capacity. But the Hera is just not as worthy as we thought for its price and quality. Number 4, the Megalodon. The Megalodon is a very recent entry into this entire lineup. The Megalodon, though, does have itself a few problems with it, and it's just not as worthy as we thought. But being that it was a very recent blaster, I almost feel like that it's just safe to say that having such a lousy function in the Megalodon's capability, it's just a bit more to say that many people out there who have owned themselves a Megalodon or even a Mastodon, because they both have themselves some rather bad pieces of quality put into them on the interior to where their electrical functions and cheap wiring wouldn't just allow for the best kind of performance and the last of durability. Number 3, the Swarmfire. A dart tag blaster that was promoted to becoming the flagship blaster of its own time back in 2011, the Swarmfire did also take C batteries instead of D batteries like what the Stampede and Vulcan would use, or even the Rhino Fire if you wanted to go back that recent. But the swarm fire itself was yet another prime example about how sometimes batteries would cause its electrical systems to age too quickly. Being that it would sometimes lag when firing darts and spinning itself, even though it had itself a pretty good dart capacity of up to 3 darts per second, a capacity of 20 darts at least, a dart firing rate of up to 3 darts per second, the swarm fire itself is just one of those that we thought would end very well. But many people just don't choose a swarm fire very often because of how most of the time its functions just aren't as relevant to how well it just might look. Number 2, the Stampede ECS. And the Stampede ECS, well, I was hoping it didn't really have to come to this part of the list, but the Stampede ECS actually did have itself some bad problems on it. The Stampede ECS was just one of those very good blasters out there that was originally concepted to having itself a 50 dart drum, but was cancelled and then eventually only came with 3 18 dart clips as well as a 6 dart clip. It also included itself a grip/bipod and a shield that you could put on top or in front of it to protect yourself from any oncoming flying darts. But the Stampede ECS's electrical functions were actually bad. And I mean bad. Because I've had the Stampede for several years, and the fact is that now I'm practically done with it, simply because it does take D batteries, and because of how expensive most D batteries are from different brands, the Stampede ECS would actually be so bad that many people out there who just want to collect the Stampede would not find it to be as functional. And this is all because of the Stampede's ability to draining the battery's power too quickly. And some things out there, they do drain power from batteries faster than other things out there. But the Stampede is just one of those examples in the Nerf community that we have come to know about, especially when it came to figuring out how bad the Stampede's use of battery life happened to be. And finally, number 1, the Alien Menace Incisor. Disappointingly, the Incisor from the new Alien Menace series at the time just happened to not have as good of capability as we thought it would. And once again, this is a blaster that I did not own back then. I do not own it now. But the Incisor itself has had itself some confirmed theories about how, compared to many others out there, the Incisor is just one of those, in any case, that even I've discovered to where it would just be that bad. The Incisor is just one of those that drains power a bit too quickly, but compare that to any other blaster I've mentioned that tends to drain power from batteries too quickly. The Incisor is just one of those cases where it drains too quickly. It's almost like you have to go buy new batteries every single week, every time you use the Incisor on a daily basis. It's just that bad, really. The Stampede, I didn't really have to go and replace batteries all too often. At least 1 or 2 months would pass before the batteries would start to show signs of wear and tear. But the Incisor, because I've had some experience with the Incisor myself, and battery power was just draining too quickly. That's just a bad example about how Nerf seems to drain so much power from batteries in order to prime such a certain component in the blaster's function to fire a dart up to a certain range. This would be a certainty to drain your wallet with as much money as possible just to replace the batteries in such a blaster like this. And there you have it right there. 16 worst cases of electrical shortages in motorized blasters. I hope that you enjoyed this content, and I do hope that you enjoy any other kind of content that I do offer here on my channel. And if you want to see more, go down to my channel. Make sure that you like, subscribe, comment, follow me on social media, and stay on the Hollywood side.